Well, greetings everybody. Welcome once again to the RecPoker Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Fredland. We are officially sponsored by Running Aces Casino and Racetrack, and this is already episode 105. So thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about a summary of the seminar that we just put on, our first ever RecPoker Training seminar, and that's why this episode is a day later than normal. I wanted to go through the seminar and actually give you some highlights from that for those of you who missed it, and maybe a little summary for those of you who were there as well. Fantastic first seminar. I had about 25 people in attendance and just some great discussion. So it's really about the perfect size and some great stuff that came out of that. So I'm excited to share that. Also, I've continued to noodle the pre-flop opening ranges for early in a tournament. I think a lot of good feedback from the last few sessions, but also some people saying, I thought you were trying to make it easier and you made it harder. So as I've been playing with this approach, I've been utilizing it in tournaments and trying to say, how can I simplify this even further? And so I think today I've actually done it. I've certainly simplified it. The question is it as robust? Is it as usable and as theoretically appropriate? But I think it's a much easier approach that then can be built on. So I'm going to quickly touch on that at the end of this episode as well. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. So let's get right into it. First of all, the seminar, again, a great time. Thanks for those of you who turned out. When you do something for the first time, and I've had many things that I've launched over the years, from nonprofit humanitarian efforts to other nonprofit organizations to seminars to anything else, you never know how many people are going to show up. And so I felt really encouraged and supported. It was around 20-25 people or so that totally showed up. Andy Kaplan, Brad Olson, Chris Gorton, Chris Nelson, Dave Barker, Derek Smith, Jack Burke, Jack LaRoe, Jason Zilmer, Jennifer Nelson, Jill Burke, John Somsky, Julie Porter, Chris Hall, Matt Hamilton, Rob Washam, Stacy Nelson, Taylor Moss, Vicky Zell. Thank you all so much. If I missed anybody, I am super sorry. But fantastic, great time. Thank you so much. Key takeaways from the seminar for those of you who missed it. The seminar was primarily grounded in a video from the Solve for Why Academy. It was Matt Hunt was the instructor for the video, and he called it Anatomy of an MTT. And he really stepped back and took a high-level look at what's going on at the different phases of a tournament and how should we be thinking about tournament in its different phases, about which elements we give more weight to. And that was kind of the overall approach. And so obviously in this episode, I can't give you everything, but I want to give you a high-level view because it was just such good stuff. The first thing Matt really talked about was the 3 strategic incentives that are involved in playing a tournament. Now, obviously, you have chip expected value, those sorts of decisions. He kind of took that out of the equation, recognizing that's always part of the decision is what's our chip EV. But there's also 3 strategic incentives that you need to adjust how much weight you give to those regardless, depending on where you are in the tournament. And this is really what separates tournament poker from playing cash, because you actually have to think about where you are in the tournament and it should adjust your decisions. So the 3 strategic incentives are the volatility incentive, which means at different phases of the tournament, you should be more or less incented to add volatility to your play. There are some parts of the tournament where volatility is welcomed and even encouraged, and there's other parts where volatility is discouraged or is actually a bad strategic thing to introduce. So we talked about that. ICM is another strategy and incentive that you need to consider that adjusts over the time, over different phases of the tournament, and also the consideration for your future skill edge. Thinking about what is your skill edge for the rest of the tournament. How likely is your skill edge going to contribute to your success in the rest of the tournament? And that should be considered with high regard in some phases of the tournament, and other parts of the tournament, that's not really a factor. So we talked about those are the 3 things: the volatility, ICM, and future skill edge incentive. And then Matt broke down the tournament into what he called 6 different phases. And he looked at what is our primary goal in each of those 6 phases, And then based on that goal, we talked about, well, how do these 3 strategic initiatives fit in to each of those phases, into each of those goals, and how should it impact our decisions? So the 6 phases of a tournament, he called the preservation phase. This is phase 1. And the goal here is really just chip up with minimal risk. The second phase is expansion. And here the goal is to try to build a stack so that we are able to then put pressure on the bubble when the bubble comes. The third phase is the bubble. And here our goal really depends on our stack size and our position. So in some cases, we're for a super short stack. We have one sort of approach. If we're a big stack, we have another sort of approach. But in either case, we're actually trying to manage the volatility disincentive. In other words, there's not an incentive to introduce a lot of volatility on the bubble, because if you're a short stack, you want to try to survive. But you can leverage that as the big stack, knowing that people just want to survive, knowing that the medium stacks don't want to put their cash at risk, and so you can play more aggressively. But either way, the goal is to look at how is the volatility disincentive impacting everybody, and then taking the appropriate strategy and exploiting where it makes sense. So the fourth phase, he recalls the consolidation phase, and here the goal is to build a stack that can then make a deep run. And then the fifth phase is leveraging. And here at this point, the goal is to accumulate a stack so that we can leverage that against other stacks. And then the final phase is closing it out. And the goal here, of course, is to acquire every chip and win. So if we look at each of those 6 phases and we look at those 3 strategic initiatives, you can see that those initiatives should be given different weight depending on the phase that we're in. And so I'm going to quickly go through this. And again, we spent an hour and a half on this in the seminar. But in the preservation phase, where the goal is to chip up with minimal risk, really there's a very low volatility incentive. In other words, we do not want to introduce volatility. We want to play a low volatility game. And at that phase, there's also no ICM implications at all either. And at that phase, we really want to consider our future skill edge. We don't want to risk ourselves in marginal spots, knowing that over the long run, we think we can outplay our opponents. So the preservation phase is really about trying to chip up with minimal risk, reducing our volatility. And we talked a bit about the difference between volatility and variance. Variance is that luck piece that's really embedded in the game itself. It's who gets which cards, who gets good cards, who hits the river, who hits the flop. Those sorts of things are things we cannot control. They're just an embedded part of the game. That's variance. Volatility is not variance. Volatility is really the extent to which we play pots, either both frequency of pots and magnitude of pots, that allow our chip stack to swing more or less. So if you were to look at a graph of your chip stack over an entire tournament, playing a low volatility approach would have just small ups and downs throughout, generally. Playing a high volatility approach would have higher spikes and valleys. So what Matt is saying is during this first phase, the preservation phase, the goal is to play a low volatility approach. Well, how do you do that? You can do that through playing less pots, being more selective with your opening hands. You can do it through maybe some checkbacks rather than raises. You can do it with pot control in terms of size of betting. You could reduce, how large you're making your bets. So there's some ways that you can reduce volatility, but that's the goal during phase 1. And that's what I've been talking about with my opening hand ranges. So as we've talked about those, I'm always referring in those situations to this phase 1 situation where we want to play a low volatility approach. The second phase is now the expansion phase. Here the goal is actually to try to build a stack, because it is so critically important to build a stack during this phase so that we have chips so that we can pressure the bubble. We all know that you can really chip up during the bubble phase. So we want to be on the side of that bubble where we are able to put the pressure on our opponent so that we can get more pots, we can accumulate more chips. So we need chips to be able to do that. So the expansion phase is all about building a stack to apply pressure. Well, in terms of those 3 strategic incentives, this means we need to start being willing to introduce volatility into our game. So as we hit this phase, we're willing to play a little bit more volatile. The ICM implications have kind of started, but they're still really not a major factor in our decisions, not until we hit the bubble. So at this point, in our future skill edge, we're still considering that. How do we consider and how do we factor into the fact that we could probably outplay our opponents the rest of the tournament, but it's a little bit less of a factor as we are willing to take on more volatility. So really, the key shift from preservation to expansion is introducing volatility into our play. And again, that doesn't mean you have to start firing every flop. That doesn't mean you have to start firing everything. It just means we start introducing and welcoming a bit more volatility into our game, which is sort of the reverse of the things that I mentioned about before. We could start 3-betting more. We could start playing bigger pots, that sort of thing. And one of the discussions came up about, well, when does that start? How do we know when we should be moving from preservation to expansion? And I think one of the most obvious ways to recognize that when you're playing an ante tournament is when the antes kick in. That's a great kind of a trigger to say this is maybe the time that we need to start moving from preservation to expansion. If there aren't antes, it's maybe the time when the registration ends. It's maybe the time when you realize that you're not getting 6 callers with a 3x open. Some of those things where people aren't just playing kind of every hand in every situation. And you could, I guess, look at how many big blinds are left, but I think that's going to vary so much based on tournament. But maybe, once that average stack gets to 20 to 30, maybe 30 to 50, depending if you're playing a bigger tournament, that's maybe the time to start introducing from some volatility, start chipping up so that you have the chips when we hit the bubble. And that's the third phase, is the bubble. And as I mentioned, it really depends on your stack size, how you want to approach this. But in terms of our 3 strategic initiatives, at this point, the future skill edge really isn't a big thing anymore. You're just really trying to make what's the right bubble decision, not really thinking about, well, how, can I take advantage of this person or this field later? That has started to drop off quite a bit. On the bubble, the ICM implications become huge because at this point, if you bust, you get 0. If you don't bust, you get some level of min cash, and that can be a pretty significant element, especially the bigger the tournament. So the bigger the tournament, the bigger the ICM weight that's given, because if it's a $30 tournament, people aren't as worried about getting a $43 minimum cash. But if it's a $1,000 tournament, us recreational players are saying, well, I want to do everything I can to at least get that $1,000 or the min cash from that. So ICM is a bigger impact in those tournaments. But I think the biggest, certainly the ICM increasing is huge. The converse of that is your volatility incentive drops almost to 0. You really don't want to play a lot of big pots here. And so what that means is if you are the short stack, you're basically folding a lot of stuff unless you are ready to shove, because you don't have an incentive to play a lot and a lot of big pots. So you're tightening up quite a bit. If you are a medium stack, you can maybe put some pressure on the smaller stacks if nobody else is putting pressure on you, but generally you're just kind of want to preserve your medium stack. You would like to survive the bubble with enough chips that you can you can kind of get involved then and try to really chip up to make a deep run. So you're kind of disincented to play a lot of pots as well, especially big pots, because you don't want to do anything stupid and bust out before the bubble, and you want to have chips when the bubble breaks. So you're sort of in that spot. And so that's why it's so important in the expansion phase to get the chips so that you're the big stack, because if you're the big stack on the bubble, you should be applying a lot of pressure on folks, especially on those medium stacks, because they're the ones that really don't want to play a pot with you because you're the big stack. The short stacks may just say, well, I need to take a shot here. I'm going to try to double up, and if I bubble, that's fine. But it's those medium stacks that really have no incentive to play pots unless they have an absolute monster. So if you're the big stack, you should be applying pressure. And you can only be the big stack if you're building up during the expansion phase. So in all cases, there's a disincentive to play pots and play big pots. But if you're the big stack, you should be leveraging that. If you're not leveraging that as a big stack, you are missing a huge opportunity. And if you're a medium stack and there's a big stack at your table that's not leveraging it, you should take on that role. You should test the waters. You should try to become that person, because if it works, if everybody else is just tightening up, you have an opportunity to steal so many pots. And I know I mentioned this before. I went from like 150,000 to 250,000 in chips on the bubble of a tournament simply by stealing blinds and antes when everybody else just wanted to survive to the bubble. And I shared this story as well. At one point I was doing this and I was stealing a ton of pots, and then the short stack at the table had like 3 big blinds, and they shoved their 3 big blinds, and I was in the big blind with a monster stack, and I folded. And people couldn't believe it. They thought there was collusion. They thought it was a horrible play. At the time, I didn't justify my play to anybody at the table. I didn't feel like I needed to do that. But the reason I did that is because I would rather sacrifice that pot and continue to be able to punish the bubble than to knock that person out. If I knock that person out, my reign of terror is over. I can no longer steal stuff. Now I'm going to have all these 20 and 30 big blind stacks, mixing it up, getting it in, and I just have to kind of shut it down there. So the last thing I wanted was for the bubble to break. So I actually folded and then was able to continue for about another orbit, taking 3 or 4 more pots, and adding another 50,000, 60,000 chips to my stack. So that's sort of the advantage. And so you just have to kind of know how you can leverage that. But that's the phase of the bubble. And so that's where how you play and how you factor in these strategic incentives varies greatly depending on the size of your stack. Okay, so now the bubble breaks. And we all know playing tournament poker, what happens then, sort of the chaos reigns, everything just kind of happens, everybody's getting their chips in. Well, Matt Hunt calls that the consolidation phase, and our goal here is really to try to build a stack that can make a deep run. So as the chaos breaks out, what that means is the ICM implications or incentives go way down. The bubble's broken. In most tournaments, there's quite a few bust outs before the next pay bump, and it's such a gradual pay that there's really no ICM implications. Like if I bust in 90th place in a big tournament, or if I bust in 60th place, it's just not much different. So I might as well take a shot at trying to chip up. So the ICM implications right after the bubble in this consolidation phase are very, very low. My future skill edge is also pretty low still. At this point, I'm just trying to consolidate. I'm not worrying about how I can leverage my current stack to outplay my opponents later. My primary goal is to accumulate chips. As all of these stacks are consolidating and people are busting out, I need to make the right decision to try to build a stack now. It's only when I build a stack that I can actually leverage my future skill edge. So the future skill edge is actually pretty pointless during this phase, because if I don't get the chips, I can't even leverage it anyway. So that's low. But what's super high, what we really need to give a lot of weight to, is volatility. And in this consolidation phase, when the bubble has broken, this is the time when we need to say, okay, I am willing to take on volatility. Just like in phase 2, when we said this is our expansion phase, I need to take on some volatility. Right after the bubble breaks, when we're in the consolidation phase, that's another time where we should be saying, okay, I need to welcome some volatility here. That doesn't mean you get crazy. That doesn't mean you start shoving with 9-4 offsuit. It doesn't mean any of that. It says I need to welcome volatility, meaning if it looks like we're heading toward a big pot and I have a legitimate hand, I might need to be willing to mix it up there. Or I might need to be willing to 3-bet a little more often, or 4-bet, or check raise, or some of those other places that we can add volatility, because this is the time we need to build a stack. If we really want to make a deep run, we can't let the bubble break and then just sit there while everybody else is consolidating stacks, and we're just sitting there with our 30 big blinds, which eventually becomes 20 big blinds, which eventually becomes 15 big blinds, and then everybody else who we had out chipped has either busted or consolidated. And now when you look at who's left, depending on who's left, let's say there's 20 people left in the tournament, we have the shortest stack. We didn't do anything wrong. We didn't make any big mistakes, but what we did is we didn't allow ourselves to get involved with the volatility, and now we're the short stack with 20 left. And of course, the magic can happen and we can double up and that sort of thing, but we have not positioned ourselves well to make a deep run in the tournament. So phase 4, the consolidation phase, we need to start welcoming volatility back at that point. Okay? So you can see how tournaments are very different. If you think just about volatility, preservation phase, super low incentive to play a volatile style. Phase 2, when we're expanding, high incentive to play volatility. Phase 3, the bubble, low incentive for volatility. Phase 4, high incentive for volatility. You kind of see this, how important it is to really consider where you are in the tournament to dictate the decisions that you make at the table. So that's phase 4, consolidation. And now we're starting to get pretty deep. And now the reason we want to take advantage of the consolidation phase is that so we have chips, so we can leverage that stack against our opponent. And that is phase 5 of the tournament Matt Hunt calls leveraging. The goal here is to accumulate a stack that can leverage it so that we can leverage it against other stacks. So, the consolidation phase has sort of ended. The chaos has ended. The welcoming of volatility has ended. We're going to start reducing that volatility incentive. We still have to welcome some, but we are going to reduce that. The incentive to play volatile pots in a volatile style reduces as we get deeper into this 5th phase of the tournament. But what's increasing now is ICM. Now we're starting to get to a point where the pay jumps matter. And also our future skill edge is going to matter as we get deeper and deeper because now we know our opponents well. We've been playing with them for a long time. Eventually we'll be at a final table. We'll know exactly who our opponents are, and we know if we are going to have a skill edge, and we know if we're going to be able to leverage that skill edge. So as we start to hit this leveraging stack, we do want to still take on some volatility, but there's less incentive to actually look for that. But we're trying to build that big stack. We're trying to chip up, and then we're going to start using that leverage against our opponents. And same sort of thing that we had in the bubble. Short stacks don't want to bust, but they're willing to put their chips in a little bit more liberally. If they know they're the short stack, they know they're going to have to double up to make a run. So you have to be careful with them. But those middle stacks are the ones that we can apply pressure to. Again, if we are that middle stack, those big stacks are going to be applying pressure to us, and it puts us in a tough spot. We want to be able to, the ICM implications are growing, so we don't want to bust before those short stacks, but we don't want to sit there and be beaten on and continue to dwindle down. So it puts us in a tough spot when we are those middle stacks. And that's why it's so critical in that consolidation phase to get chips so that we can be the one to apply pressure. We're not the ones that are sitting there just being pressured. So that's the impetus for building a stack. But in that leveraging phase, that's what's going on. A lot of leveraging, at least what should be happening. The big stacks should be leveraging their stack against the middle stacks. And then finally, the final phase is closing it out. And the goal here is to acquire every chip. And we talk quite a bit about what that looks like with that. And there's a lot of nuances there between playing 8-handed, 9-handed, 5-handed, 4-handed, heads up, all of those things. But at the end of the day, there's a certain level of volatility that we need to accept as we get shorter and shorter in there, as we get 6-handed, 5-handed, 4-handed, 3-handed, but also the ICM implications are increasing as well. And so there's an interesting dynamic. One of the things to think about is these 3 strategic initiatives are sometimes in competition with each other. I mean, sometimes there's a high regard that we should be giving ICM. In other words, we should be, thinking about the next pay jumps and giving that a high amount of weight, yet we're also in a phase where we should be welcoming volatility. Well, those are competing interests. So we have to consider how much weight do we give each of those when we have a decision with a big draw for all of our chips. And I think that's just part of poker. And it's consistent with every other decision that I think we make. We've talked about in the podcast where often there's all these considerations that we should be taking under advisement when we're making decisions, and sometimes they're in conflict with each other. There are situations that we're in where, boy, there's a high incentive to re-raise somebody because they're a very loose opener, and we should probably be re-raising them. But there's also a high incentive to fold because of the situation in the tournament or our chip stack or whatever. So you have to sort of manage those things when there's multiple factors that seem to be conflicting. It's pretty rare when you have a decision that's 100% obvious. You have to kind of weigh all of that out. So that summary was a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. I didn't realize how many words I'd have to put behind that, but it was a fantastic video. And I will be doing more seminars. And I think one of the things I'd really love to do is do these private seminars, to do this exact same seminar, but for your group, whether you have a home game, if you're in some geographic area and you can gather, 10, 20 people together to do this, I'm willing to travel and put on this seminar. I can't just provide you the content because it's premium content for Solve for Why, but we do have authority to be able to show this to these groups. And so I'm happy to travel to do that. So feel free to reach out to me if that's something you want to do. We can do just this video and have some conversation, or we can do some other things as well. I know a lot of feedback from the seminar was, man, let's get together and play and talk about our hands. And so I'd love to be a part of that as well. The other main video that we showed during this was about 20 minutes of the Poker Out Loud video, which is something else Solve for Why does, where Matt Berkey and Christian Soto, Jordan Young, Jack, Nick, some of these guys from Solve for Why play with these noise-canceling headphones, and they talk about their thought process as they're playing this cash game. So it wasn't a tournament, it was a cash game, and these guys all know each other, and they're all world-class players. So the dynamics weren't exactly perfect, but it was interesting to hear some of their thought processes as they were making plays. Boy, I know Berkey's going to be defending a lot of his buttons, so I have to be more selective and have a good range construction to be able to open here. And so a lot of interesting things. I think the feedback was kind of mixed. I think largely it was entertainment more than anything, but there were some really good, I thought processes these guys were following that were actually pretty insightful, especially around thinking ahead. People are, especially this Jack, one of the players, he would talk about, well, if I do this, then I have to be prepared to do this on the turn in the river, or I want to make this a 2-street game. I'm going to check back here and just turn this into a bluff catcher. Some of those sorts of things, because he knows, his opponent was going to be, check raising a lot in this spot, and he doesn't want to be put in that situation. So some really good stuff there. I thought it was fascinating, but kind of mixed feedback. So we'll see how we use that in seminars going forward. People either loved it or they were kind of like, yeah, it was good, but it didn't add a ton of value. But to me, it was pretty impressive, super intriguing, and if nothing else, kind of fascinating there. And then the only other part of the seminar I wanted to bring up was in the first session, we actually had some time to talk a little bit about 3-betting, and we talked quite a bit about the pros and cons of 3-betting. And it was a pretty fascinating conversation. I thought super helpful. One of the things that kind of summarized the discussion was Alex Assassinato Fitzgerald had put together some things that we looked at. And basically his conclusion after all of his analysis is you should be 3-betting a lot when people aren't 4-betting you. That was his final conclusion, that there's so much fold equity, so much value. There's so many positives that come from 3-betting. If you're not going to be getting 4-bet, it's a very high value sort of play. Now, of course, you have to factor into the tournaments we play and how much it costs to 3-bet as a percentage of your stack and all those things. But it was a pretty good discussion. So with that, that's kind of the end of the summary of the seminar piece. I am going to talk a little bit about those pre-flop ranges still. But again, if this is something you're interested in, I think there's really good feedback in general from the seminar. So I'm going to be doing some more of these, but I'd love your feedback on what you'd want to see and dates, times, costs, all of those things. That's all super helpful. I want to thank all the people that showed up. A lot of people showed up in RecPoker sweatshirts and hats and patches, and I remember seeing at least Jack LaRue, Matt Hamilton, Taylor Moss, Stacey Nelson, Brad Olson, Rob Washam, and there's probably others that I missed that had those things on. I should have taken a note, but thanks to all of you for kind of repping it. But also we continue to see more and more people wearing the patches, the sweatshirts, the hats in the casino. I mean, Brian Soja, I saw him the other day. Stacey Nelson and I were both wearing patches when we got through one of the qualifiers. Steve Olson, Jerry Kniff is out. I don't know where he is, Choctaw or something. He's wearing the patch. I know Darren Peasley had it on again. Chad McVean. Thanks to all you guys. It's fun to see all you guys repping the brand, and I appreciate that. It's very humbling, and I don't take for granted the trust that you put in me and the brand to be able to wear that with confidence. So thanks for that. All right. I'm saying a lot of words, but this is what I do, I guess. You guys gave me permission to talk, so I'm going to talk. As an introvert, I need permission to talk, and I guess you have no option but to listen or to shut me off. So I'll keep talking, but I do want to chat a little bit about the pre-flop ranges that I've been working on over the past several weeks. It's been so good, and thanks to all of you for the feedback. It's just been super helpful. I love where this has gone. I've had a lot of success at the casino. That's really continued. I ended up going 3 for 3 in qualifiers, and I do credit in large part how this pre-flop hand ranging has helped me become more selective in this, especially in that phase 1 piece. And then I just kind of opened up and changed my approach a little bit as we get into the expansion phase. But this has been super helpful to me. And I think I've made it more complicated, but I still love the approach and I'm still using it in general. But the way I'm rethinking about this quite a bit in terms of, okay, how do we make this applicable in a regular tournament with, especially in those situations where I'm playing daily tournaments and people are talking to me all the time and I love talking to people. So I don't have the ability to focus as much as I could or should on that. But even for home games, how can I incorporate this in a way that isn't going to take a lot of mental energy, is going to allow me to be social, yet still apply it? And so what I've come up with is this incredibly simplified approach. At least I think it's simplified. Forgive me, I'm a math guy, so you never know. But basically, if you've been following this for any time, you know that it starts with looking at the button and considering the button range 2, and then just moving away from the button 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So if you are in the cutoff, just one away from the button, that would be range 3. And then keep going. So just start with that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever that is. That's your base range. Now you just know if I'm in range 4, and if it folds around to me, I'm going to raise. That's it. If it folds around to me, I'm going to raise all of my range 4. If there are limps in front of me, I'm still going to play that entire range 4, but I'm going to polarize it. And I've got, all the math that I did before, all the codes and stuff before was all around delineating how to polarize that range. I think the most simplistic way that you can think about this is just saying, I'm going to still play that entire range 4, but I'm going to polarize it. And in my mind, that just means if I've got a range 4 hand that I think kind of sucks, I'm going to raise with it. And if I have a range 4 hand that is pretty awesome, I'm going to raise with that too. And everything else in the middle where it's not really awesome, but it doesn't really suck, I'm just going to call there. Now, over the time, I would recommend working that out so you kind of balance those pretty close. But in the tournaments we play, I just don't think that's as critical. But I do think it's important to be able to... My phone's ringing now. You guys will get to hear that for a few times. But I do think it's important to actually raise with some crappy hands that you're willing to fold. So the idea there is that you raise with the crappy hands, a part of that range, with the intention of folding to a re-raise. And just being okay with that. So say if you're in range 4, that means that 10-7 suited is in your range. So I'm just going to raise over limpers there. And if somebody re-raises, I just fold. No big deal, whatever. And if I have pocket kings, I'm going to raise. And if they re-raise, I'm either going to call or I'm going to shove. But it's polarized. And just having that general construct of saying, I'm still going to play this range, but I'm going to polarize my raising range and then just call with everything else, I think it's super helpful and super easy to apply. And then the other action, if there's a raise in front of me, all I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my base range by 3 ranges and then polarize that if possible. So if I'm in base range 4 and somebody raises, I now know, okay, I'm in base range 7. So I'm going to need a hand that's at least in range 7. And if it's not, I just fold. And if it is, I can just decide what I'm going to do there, but I can try to polarize it. If it's a hand that, isn't great, I could say, I am going to 3-bet here with the intention of folding. If it's a hand that's awesome, I'm going to 3-bet with the intention of getting it all in. If it's somewhere in the middle, I'm just going to call behind. And if you think about it, if I'm in range 7, I'm already in a pretty good hand, but that could include queen 10 of diamonds. Well, I might want to re-raise queen 10 of diamonds. I'm going to 3-bet with queen 10 of diamonds, and if they shove, I just fold. I'm also going to re-raise with pocket aces, and if they shove, obviously I'll get it in. Anything in the middle there, like pocket jacks, that kind of stuff, I might just want to call behind. So that is the end. That's really the key. That's it. That's the strategy. You still have to know what's in each of those ranges, and I'll kind of come back and summarize that again. But instead of thinking about all these codes and stuff, just think, what's my base range? Okay, I'm in base range 3. If there's no action to me and my hand is in base range 3, I raise. If there's limps in front of me and my hand is in base range 3, I'm going to raise with the awesome hands and I'm going to raise with the crappy hands that are in that range and just call behind with the rest. If there's a raise in front of me, I'm going to say, well, I'm now in base range 6. If my hand is in base range 6, I'm going to raise if I don't love it, and I'm going to raise if I absolutely love it, and I'm going to call behind if I don't. That's just this polarizing mentality. And the beauty of doing that is then you can get some of those 3 bets through that, you can pick up pots that you otherwise wouldn't have, but also you could get paid then when you have the monster hand because people know that you're willing to do that with less. So that is the general construct of making that decision pre-flop in the preservation phase 1 of a tournament. Just to recap, well, what hands are in each of those ranges? Well, if you're in base range 2, whatever your base range number is, that's the pairs that are in that range. So base range 2 is pocket 2s or better. So if you're on the button, you're in base range 2, pocket 2s or better are in that base range. So that's true for all of the positions. If you're in base range 9, it's pocket 9s are better. Base range 7, it's pocket 7s are better. So that's how the pairs work. Then you increase that rank by 3 to know which suited cards are in that range. So if you have suited cards, they both have to be at least 3 higher than the base range number. So if I'm in the hijack, so I'm in position 2, 3, 4, I'm in base range 4. So now my base range includes pocket 4s or better and any 2 suited cards that are both at least 7. Okay, so 8-7, ace-7, king-7, 10-7, all of those are in base range 4 if they're suited. If they're not suited, it just goes 1 higher than that with a minimum that both cards have to be at least 10. So this is the most complicated part, but once you get this part, it's super easy. So let's say I'm in base range 3. I'm in the cutoff. Well, my base range is pocket 3s or better, any 2 suited cards, 6 or better, and any 2 offsuit cards normally would be 7 or better, but remember we have this constraint that they both have to be at least 10. So any unsuited cards, 10 or better. If I am in base range 5, well, I need pocket 5s or better, I need 2 suited cards, 8 or better, and I still need 2 unsuited cards, 10 or better. If I'm in base range 7, I need pocket 7s or better, any 2 suited cards that are at least 10 or higher, and any 2 offsuit cards that are at least jack or higher. It's got to be 1 higher than those suited cards. So that's how you figure out, that's what's in those ranges there. The only other stipulation would be I've added suited aces to base ranges 2 and 3. So if I have a suited ace and I'm in base range 2 or 3, that's also part of that range. So I think you can really work on this in 2 parts. One is understanding that formula there to say, well, what hands are in base ranges? And I think you simply just say the pairs are there, suited cards that are at least both rank 3 or higher than that. Those pairs, and then the offsuit ones are at least 1 higher than those suited cards, but they're at least both 10. That is part of the work. And then the other work is saying, well, what do I do with the, if the action in front of me? If my hand is in the base range and there's no action, I raise. If my hand is in the base range and there's limps, I'm going to raise or call, but my raises are going to be with the awesome hands and the sucky hands, and I'm going to call everything else. If there's a raise in front of me, my base range shifts up by 3 groups. Then if my hand is still in that base range, it's going to be polarized again. If it's in that range but I don't really love it, I'm going to raise. If it's in that range and I love it, I'm going to raise. If it's in that range and I neither love it or hate it, I'm going to call behind. That is really the new summary. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Obviously, a lot of tweaking can go on to try to balance it perfectly and all those things, but ultimately that is what it is coming down to in that situation. So I'd love to hear your feedback on that. I'm going to keep using that. I'm still waiting to write this up formally until I really kind of fine tune it and get it down there. But hopefully that's a more applicable, more actionable sort of approach to this versus all of the codes. But I think part of the beauty of this that people have enjoyed, that I've enjoyed, is that you've been with me right along the journey. This isn't looking back and saying, here's what I did. Week by week, I've been building this, basing it on feedback. So hopefully you've been able to gather my thought process behind this, what I've liked, what I haven't liked, how I've tweaked it. So all of those mathematical things behind it, all of those opening ranges, all of the balancing, all of the codes, all of those things are the foundation of what's coming up to be hopefully a fairly simple, actionable approach to opening hand ranges early in a tournament. And obviously a lot of work to do as far as what do we do out of the blinds, what do we do when we hit phase 2, all of those things. But this is the new, I guess, summary of where we're at. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So that is it for the content. Just a couple of reminders. I'd love to have you go to RecPokerTraining.com. If you haven't signed up to be part of our newsletter, do that. That's the best way to stay in touch. I'm not going to bog you down with a ton of stuff, but it'll at least give you awareness as to the opportunities that are coming up. And if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll get a 115-page workbook from Jonathan Little free of charge. You'll get a download that you can have, and people have loved receiving that. So thanks to Jonathan and pokercoaching.com for that. But do that. That's the best way to stay connected. Otherwise, just go to recpokertraining.com and just kind of check out the things that are out there. A lot of information, a lot of things that we have in the works. And this is your opportunity to give feedback. I mean, we're just formulating this thing. We're just kind of building this thing. We're building up RecPoker Nation. And really my goal is to take all of this great premium content that's out there, to synthesize it, to curate it, to consolidate it, and to be able to bring it and make it actionable for us, the recreational player, without you spending a ton of money, spend a ton of time. I'm trying to do all of that for us, and then bring it down and summarize it. And so the question is, what's the best way to take all of that information and bring it to you? And I know it's part of that's learning styles, but part of that, I think the value that we can bring is to do that in a way that builds community. I think more and more and more, I'm getting feedback from people that are saying, I don't really have people that want to talk poker with me. I want to have this group of people that are kind of at my level, maybe a little bit higher, that I can talk poker with, that I can ask questions with, that I can be honest and authentic about and say what I'm struggling and celebrate our victories together. And I think that's where more and more where we're going with this is to provide content for those of you who want to just consume it on your own, but to also provide avenues to make connections and be part of something bigger than yourself, to have people supporting and encouraging you and answering questions and dialoguing and playing together. So that's what I want to do. That's what I want to keep building. So I'd love to have you be part of that. So check out all the training opportunities we have coming up. We've got a Q&A online player panel November 29th from 7 to 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. I still don't have the invitation sent out on that, but at this point, I'd say save the date. That's going to be fantastic. We've got 2 of the players are playing right now in a day 2 of a pretty big event here in Minnesota, so that's kind of fun. We're rooting for them, but it's going to be a great time. But check all of that stuff out. Give me a call if you have any questions, comments, concerns. The best thing you can do for us right now is, if you're saying, man, I want to support Steve and I want to support the RecPoker crew, but I don't really know the best way how. I'm located in Australia or Canada or all these other places that you guys have been encouraging me from, India. The best things that you can do to really support the RecPoker podcast and the RecPoker training that aren't going to cost you a lot of money. First of all, if you go to iTunes, if you could like, rate, review, subscribe, all of those things are huge as far as helping us drive more listenership. That would be great. The second thing that you could do that would be really encouraging is to go to patreon.com, and you can check out the different levels. There's different things that you get at different levels, but even just supporting the podcast at $1 a month, obviously that's not going to change our life. But all of those things are super encouraging, and they allow us, as we consolidate, as we add all the people that are getting involved, they allow us more freedom to do more content and those things. But primarily, that's just a huge encouragement to me. Whenever I see somebody sponsor on patreon.com, it just means a lot to me personally, and I appreciate that. And I think the third thing that you can do is really think about if you have a group of people that want to learn together. think about having me come in and give a seminar or give you some of this premium content that's only available for hundreds of dollars a month. I can help share that with you. I can help lead and facilitate a discussion around whatever it is that you want to talk about. I'm happy to travel wherever to make, as long as it makes sense to do this for you. Spend a half a day or 2 days or whatever, really digging into this stuff. I would love to do that as well. And then finally, the last thing to consider is if you are connected with a casino or a large home game or whatever, reach out to them, make the connection with me and see maybe there's something that we can do together. I would love to go to a casino and put on a 4-hour seminar before a big thing, or a 2-hour seminar, or to lead a discussion before a big tournament or a big tournament weekend or something. I think that would be fantastic. I think it could add a ton of value to the casino, to the player, and I think it'd just be a great thing to add into a tournament weekend. And I think that would be really fun for the large home games. Same sort of thing there. I'd love to be part of helping build the RecPoker Nation and increasing the number and level of skill of the people that are playing this great game. So I'll stop rambling now, but I think you get the gist of it. I'd love to keep expanding this, but I'm going to need your help, and we can do this all together. So thanks for considering that. You can always reach out to me, steve@recpokertraining.com, or through Facebook, Twitter, however else you get this information. All right, that is the end of episode 105. Thanks for joining us, and we will chat with you next week.